So there are a lot of doctrines that exist in the spiritual world, in so-called Christendom. There's a lot of ideas and teachings that people have, that philosophers have come up with, and scholars have developed over the years. They don't necessarily start from the Bible. They use the Bible to justify their teachings, but they didn't begin in the Bible, and so therefore, by definition, they are not biblical. And a lot of these doctrines and teachings that exist, it may surprise you how many of our religious neighbors and other churches use these doctrines and believe these doctrines, but don't openly teach these doctrines, or at least don't just spell out exactly what they believe. And when you tell someone, did you know that your church, you say you belong to this church, did you know that your church teaches this? A lot of people say, no, I've never heard that before. And in fact, they do teach them. One of those doctrines is the doctrine of original sin, which basically says that the moment you are born, and some would even say before you're born, when you're still in the womb, that you are already a sinner, that you are already outside of relationship with God, and that you are already doomed to hell, and that if you should die, even as a little baby, or even as an aborted fetus, then you are condemned to hell. Now, you say that to someone, and you phrase it like that, and they will say, well, I've never heard my pastor say that. I've never heard my priest say that. And yet, it's in the book, not the Bible. Yeah. It's in the book of your religion, of your church. Yeah. Consider that.
And what's interesting about this, you make a really good point. You're never really going to see some denomination say, hey, guess what the sermon's going to be about this Sunday? We're going to talk about how your babies are going to hell.
Right.
We're going to talk about original sin. You won't see that. But that underlying doctrine is there, and it trickles into the other false doctrines that they teach.
Yeah,
and that's
for sure.
the problem with it, more than anything.
Yeah, these are the things they don't put in the brochures.
Right.
But they teach it and believe it if you look up their doctrines online or
and if you're
library sources.
hard-pressed with them, if you just sit down with maybe a brother or sister or cousin or somebody that you relate to, a friend, and talk about these things, they say, yeah, I guess we do believe that, but they don't hardly ever talk about it.
Right. Basically, you mention the idea, and they may say, yeah, I've heard that idea, but when you start getting into, well, doesn't that imply this?
Yeah.
Aren't the ramifications that? Then they haven't really considered it because it's not really preached or taught.
Right.
But it is believed.
Right.
And in the Catholic Church takes the official position that all children are born with the fallen human nature and are tainted by Adam's original sin. That's where the title comes from. And that's why the Catholic Church officially teaches that children need to be baptized in order to wash away the original sin of Adam.
And we've all seen that, like in movies in Hollywood.
In the end of The Godfather.
Yeah, at the end of The Godfather. You know how they'll bring in their baby, they'll have a baby dedication, they'll have the baby wearing special clothes, and the priest or the reverend will get there, and they'll sprinkle or baptize, somehow put water on this baby and cleanse it of any sin that it has.
Now let's consider the consequences of that. That means official Catholic doctrine. Again, this is not on their website. Official Catholic doctrine is if you are A, a baby, and B, not Catholic baby, you are C, going to hell.
Right.
So if you're not a member of the Catholic Church, you're going to hell. No one ever asked them that question.
No.
If you're not a member of the Catholic Church, are you going to hell? The answer, according to them, is technically yes.
Yeah.
Now, your Catholic friends won't say that. But the Catholic Church's official doctrine is that if you're not a baptized baby Catholic, you're condemned already. The moment you're born, if you don't get yourself baptized, then you are lost. Yeah. That's the idea of original sin.
And it's important for us to talk about this, Matthew, because I have Catholic friends. I have Catholic family. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that I've never had the opportunity to talk to them about, and I wish I would, because this is at the heart of what their whole religion is based upon. Either you've got to be Catholic or you've got to be a baptized baby in order to be saved.
Yeah. Now let's look at some verses. They have verses that proponents of this doctrine will teach from, and to say, look, this is why we believe that. So let's give them their fair due, and let's consider those verses, and then ask ourselves, do these verses really teach what they say it teaches? The first one, if you want to look it up, is Romans chapter 5.
Yeah, I'm actually already there.
Read verses 12 through 19.
Okay, it says, therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law.
Through verse 19?
Through 19. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam, who is a type of him who was to come. But the free gift is not like the transgression. For if by the transgression of the one the many died, much more did the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abound to the many. And the gift is not like that which came through the one who sinned. For on the one hand the judgment arose from the transgression, resulting in condemnation. But on the other hand the free gift arose from many transgressions, resulting in justification. For if by the transgression of the one death reigned through the one, much more those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ. So then, as through one transgression there resulted condemnation to all men, even so through one act of righteousness there resulted justification of life to all men. For as through the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, even so through the disobedience of the one the many will be made righteous.
All right, so overall, let's consider, and I think everybody on either side of this doctrine would agree, what Paul is generally talking about is a comparison between what two people?
Yeah, Adam and Jesus.
Adam and Jesus. I think we'd all see that. It's very clear Paul is making that comparison between, and contrast between Adam and Jesus. Now, I have 3 verses I want to pull out of that to answer this challenge, but just look at the big picture and see how, if you're going to say that what Paul is saying is that because Adam sinned, we're all sinners, would that not also mean that because Jesus died, that we're all saved?
Yeah.
Automatically.
Right.
Now, if that's the case, if one has to equal the other, Adam sinned, so we're all sinners, that's original sin. But Paul says, just as, so too was Christ who died for sin. Therefore, if Christ died, then we're all saved. If we're all saved, we don't have original sin anymore. So what do we need original sin anyway?
Right.
You see, the doctrine in this verse implodes on itself. It destroys itself.
Yeah.
But let's look at some key verses. Read verse 12 one more time.
Okay. It says, therefore, just as through one man's sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned.
All right, so is Paul saying, as those who teach this doctrine say, that Adam put sin into the hearts of everyone who came after Adam? Is that what Paul's saying?
That is not what Paul is saying.
If you keep going, he uses the phrase, the likeness of Adam's sin. Where's that verse at?
The likeness of Adam's sin would be in verse 14.
Read that verse.
It says, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam unto Moses, even over those who had not sinned, in the likeness of the offense of Adam, who is a type of him who was to come.
All right. Who committed Adam's sin?
Adam did.
Adam committed his own sin. Did Eve commit Adam's sin?
No.
No. Who was guilty of murdering his brother after Adam and Eve?
That's Cain killed Abel.
Is Adam at fault for Cain killing Abel?
No.
Why is Cain at fault?
Because Cain committed the murder.
Because Cain committed his own choice. But who gave Cain the template to follow?
Adam.
Adam, right? What is the template of sin that Adam did that we all follow? It was, I'm going to say to God, here's your commands, I'm going to do something else.
Yeah.
Adam introduced the idea, and we just chose to follow it.
Yeah.
And without Jesus, we would only have Adam's example.
Yeah.
What Paul's doing here is he's saying, then Jesus came and gave us a positive example.
Yeah.
Now we can look at a Jesus example and say, I can do something different. I can choose to be like Jesus and not give in to sin, but like Jesus, I can resist sin and temptation and be faithful.
Well, I think the key word there is this choice. So through Adam, Adam made the choice to sin. Mm-hmm. Well, through Jesus, we make the choice to follow him. And so it's about choice more than anything else. You choose sin or you choose Jesus. And babies don't have that option.
No. I mean, think about Cain and Abel. If original sin is true today, it was true 5 minutes after Adam sinned, which means Adam and Eve's children were also guilty with original sin, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, Abel, who died, was guilty of original sin.
Right.
Cain kills Abel. Is Abel in hell? Abel is praised in Hebrews chapter 11.
Right.
He's
Right.
lifted up as a hero of faith.
Right.
At what point is Abel cleansed of the sin that he inherited from Adam's transgression? See how the whole thing just falls apart?
Yes.
It unravels once you start poking holes in it.
Yeah.
Look at verse 18. Read that one.
Okay, it says, so then as through one transgression there resulted condemnation to all men, even so through one act of righteousness there resulted justification of life to all men.
So here's the verse that they use more than anyone else is this one. And they say, Adam sinned and so he condemned all men. But is that in the context? Is Paul specifically saying because Adam sinned, every individual person is condemned solely because of Adam? Or is he saying that you make the choice to sin like Adam sinned? And now with Jesus, you can make the choice to be faithful like Jesus was faithful.
Yeah.
That's the context.
Well, I make a note in my Bible under that verse, we choose sin.
Yeah.
And that's the big point that he's making.
What Adam did was he basically baked a sinful pie and put it on the windowsill. And we walked by and we took a piece.
Right.
He didn't force it on us.
No.
He provided it. Jesus baked a gracious pie and put it on his windowsill. And Jesus says, here, you can have this instead. Yeah. This won't choke you and kill you. This will give you life.
And you still have to make the choice of which pie you want to eat off
Right.
of.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of original sin is you lose the ability to choose to be sinful or righteous. And that it's already there.
Yeah.
And the Bible just doesn't teach that. Read verse 15 again.
Verse 15 says, but the free gift is not like the transgression, for if by the transgression of the one the many died, much more did the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abound to the many.
So this verse has nothing to do with birth or inheritance. This verse is all about, with some poetic language by Paul, choice. You choose to follow Adam or you can choose to follow Jesus. If you choose to go the way Adam went in the Garden of Eden when he was presented with the choice, then you will fall as Adam fell. Yeah. But Adam's falling isn't going to make you fall. It's just you choose to follow Adam's example, or, thanks to Jesus, you can follow his example.
Yeah. I have a note in my Bible under that verse that says, Adam allowed sin in the world by his actions. And that's what happened. So again, we take part in that same sin by our own actions, not because of the actions of Adam.
I mean, Adam sinned and Eve, and they're kicked out of the garden, and so then they're in the world now. And so the world, for a short time, encompassed Adam and Eve, right? Kids came later. Yeah. So they introduced sin into the world because they have people who had sinned and went into the world. Well, what followed is Cain killed his brother. Now he's made sin that much more prominent in the world. By the time you get to Noah, everybody has chosen to sin. The whole world is covered in sin, right? Well, all we're doing when we choose to sin is we are making the world that much more sinful. We're making it more of a sinful environment that people are born into. But they're not born themselves sinners. They're born into an environment that's saturated with sin because of everyone's individual choices.
Yeah.
What Christianity offers and Christ offers is an alternative, righteousness and the light and freedom from sin. And then it's up to us to spread that light against the darkness of the world.
Well, and that's the comparison in verse 18. The comparison between resulting in condemnation or resulting in justification.
Yeah.
That's the comparison between the two.
And so ultimately, the answer to Romans 5, when it's used to teach original sin, is what we started with, which is if that implies Adam caused everyone to be lost, then Jesus caused everyone to be saved. So if I'm saved, Adam is no longer causing me to be lost. Therefore, there is no original sin anymore. So you can't teach it.
Right.
So your doctrine defeats itself from that one text.
Perfect. Great job on that one.
Let's look at Psalm 51.
All right.
Here's another verse that's used. Psalm 51:5. This is probably the most famous one verse in the text, or in the Bible, that is used by proponents of being born in sin. Okay. Psalm 51, verse 5. All right, just read verse 5.
Okay. It says, behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me.
All right, so this is one of those where, depending on your translation of the original language that David wrote with, you might get a wildly different interpretation of this original Hebrew. I know the NIV Bible says, I was a sinner from birth or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's very explicit. But the Hebrew doesn't say that. That's a translation, more of an interpretation, and it doesn't accurately represent the text. If you want to know what this verse means, read the 4 verses that led up to it, and you'll get the context.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. Let me just read verse 1
now.
Let's
start in verse 1.
It says, be gracious to me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the greatness of thy compassion. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee, thee only, I have sinned, and done what is evil in thy sight.
All right, who's getting the blame right now? Who is at fault?
Well, David.
David, not Adam. David, I sinned against you. Yeah. He's not saying, that I just came into the world and I had this guilt, this transgression on me because of Adam or anyone else. No, he says, forgive me because I did something to you.
Yeah.
Most scholars agree that this text is a representation of Adam's repentance after his affair with Bathsheba.
Yeah.
This is his prayer of asking forgiveness.
Yeah.
He's committed a sin against God. Even if it's not Bathsheba, but I think it is, it's still a prayer asking for forgiveness.
Yeah, and it can be applied to any kind of sin or iniquity against God
that he chose to commit.
Yeah. One thing that I did in my Bible, I like to look at key words, and there's key words. There's this word transgression, this word iniquity, this word sin, and then again transgressions and sin, and then evil, and then iniquity and sin. This is all these different times that it's mentioned here in just the first 5 verses. And it's so interesting to see that this word transgression is talking about a rebellion, or really a breach of trust between him and God. And that's what David had done. And this iniquity is talking about having this great guilt or this blame that he felt in his own heart.
That's the word that is often used in this doctrine, which is, you're not guilty of Adam's sin, you bear the guilt of Adam's sin, is what they say.
Yeah.
They say Adam was guilty and that guilt has spread to all humanity. So now you're guilty because Adam committed the sin. You have his guilt. But David's not just talking about guilt.
No.
David is also saying, I committed an action that I need to be forgiven of.
Well, and that's what he says at the end of verse 2. He says, and cleanse me from my sin. And this word implies this punishment that he's going to have to face.
That he wants to be freed of.
That he wants to be freed of. Yeah.
And what is the word transgression? It means there's a line and you step over the line.
Correct.
He's not born stepped over the line, because the word transgression means to step over it.
Yeah.
So he says, I stepped over. I was on this side and I stepped over, which means he was originally over here and he stepped over. So he wasn't born over here if he started over here.
Well, and that's a big thing. Maybe we should stop for just a moment, kind of define the different terms about sin and transgression, because that's an important concept. A transgression is where God has said, hey, here's the box that you need to live in, and you've crossed outside of that box.
Right, as David did when he committed adultery, for example.
So God has said, you need to live within these means, or to live within this commands that I've given you, and if you step out of it, then you've transgressed. Or, it's like when someone says, do not... no trespassing.
Trespass, transgress, same idea.
Transgression. Now, sin is a different kind of word. To sin is to say, here's where God wants you to be, and you've missed the mark.
Yeah.
And so he says, I want you to live like this,
Yeah.
and when you don't live like this, then you've sinned.
Right.
And so there's a difference there. Whatever the case is, here in Psalm 51, David says, not only have I transgressed, crossed over, but I have also missed the mark.
Right.
I've done both sinning and transgression.
Both of which imply a choice he made.
A choice that he made.
That being said, let's consider that in the context of verse 5.
Yeah.
In sin, I was conceived. Do you not see, therefore, the poetic, the exaggerative nature of his phraseology? He says, I've committed this gross and terrible sin, and I've been this sinner for so long. He's not literally saying, I was in the womb a sinner, because that would go against verses 1 through 4.
Right.
He's saying, here is the sin and in the environment that I've been born into.
Yeah.
In a sinful environment I was born into even. In fact, you could even argue that he's not even talking about himself, but he's talking about his own mother.
Yeah.
And I have, in fact, the reference to that I put in my notes, that David's mother is probably guilty of sin, because David had half-sisters that she had with an Amorite king.
Right.
The man Nahash, the father of David's half-sisters. His sisters are Zeruiah and Abigail. They're not the daughters of Jesse. So in sin, a mother who was a sinner conceived David.
Yeah.
In sin, did my mother conceive me? She's the sinner, not me.
Yeah. David says, here's what the way I read this. David says, boy, I've sinned, I have transgressed, I've done something wrong. And that is the world that I live in.
Right.
I live in a world of sin surrounding us, and surrounding me is what David's saying all of the time. And so here I am, I'm wanting to do what's right, and sin is around me all the time.
And I think if this psalm is a response to David's affair with Bathsheba, it's very fitting that he would introduce his mother to it, if that's also what happened there.
Yeah.
That she was guilty of adultery, and so he had committed adultery as well.
The choice was made by his mother. The choice was made by all the world, the environment that he lived in, and David says, I also made this choice.
Right. Forgive me for my actions.
Forgive me for my actions. Yeah, exactly.
So if you want to take verse 5, you have to consider verses 1 through 4, which very clearly emphasize he made bad choices, not he was born this way.
No.
Look at 1 Corinthians 7:14. Here's another one. 1 Corinthians 7:14. So again, you're trying to look for verses that would imply that a child is born a sinner. So some will use this verse, 1 Corinthians 7:14. It
says, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husband. For otherwise your children are unclean, but now they are holy.
So, could children be born unclean? That's the way it'll be phrased. And so if Paul introduces the idea that means it's possible, that means children could be born sinners. Well, here's how that whole thing falls apart. Are all children born sinners, or could some children be born sinners, if that's how you want to phrase it? Original sin says we all bear the guilt of Adam's sin, which means all children will be born sinners. So if you're saying what Paul is actually saying is that, then Paul is actually defeating your doctrine anyway, because he would only be saying some. He's saying, or else some could be. That's obviously not what he's saying, though. The whole context there is about being a Christian married to a non-Christian.
Yeah.
And Paul's saying, just because you're married to a non-Christian, that doesn't make your marriage illegitimate. If it did, your children would be illegitimate. They'd be bastards born out of wedlock. Yeah. So he's saying, no, you have a legitimate marriage, and your children are legitimate too. Has absolutely nothing to do with sin at all.
It's just so important when you read that verse to look at the whole context of what Paul is talking about.
Exactly.
Not just take that one and say, well, I'm going to take that and just make it apply to this principle.
And really, you're just taking a phrase at the end of a verse in that case.
Exactly.
So that's nothing at all to that.
Right.
Psalm 58, verse 3. That's another one.
Okay.
Psalm 58, verse 3.
Okay. It says, the wicked are estranged from the womb. These who speak lies go astray from birth.
All right, here's a big one. This is the one they'll say, look, they are estranged from the womb. They are wicked from the womb. Okay, if I have to take David's words literally in that part of the verse, I must also take David's words literally for the rest of the verse.
Yeah.
So read the verse again slowly. What's it saying?
The wicked are estranged from the womb.
So that's, if we're to take that literally, okay, what's next?
These who speak lies go astray from birth.
All right, give me a baby that speaks a lie. Name me a baby who you say is born a sinner speaking lies.
Right.
If you find me a baby speaking lies, I will confess that's a devil child.
Yeah.
That is Rosemary's baby.
Right.
Now we have a problem. But you can't find a baby that can speak anything.
Right.
A newborn baby can't speak at all.
No.
Now you say, well, of course he doesn't mean that. Yeah, I know, right? Of course he doesn't mean that. So of course he doesn't mean a baby is born in iniquity. Yeah. He means you have a sinful environment that this child is going to be brought up into for his entire life. And these wicked people David's talking about as enemies, he's using very exaggerative language, as all Hebrews did when they wrote their complaining psalms. And he says, my enemies have been wicked from the beginning.
Yeah.
He doesn't mean literally from birth they're born a sinner. He means they've been doing evil for as long as they've been around.
And that's a great hermeneutical principle right there. You can't take part of a verse and say, well, this is literal, but then the other part of the verse is figurative.
Right.
Either it's either or.
Yeah, the Bible has a lot of figurative language.
Yeah.
But it identifies itself as such,
yes.
and it stays in one realm before it moves to a different.
Yeah.
This would be David flying by the seat of his pants with the language, and that just doesn't fit.
Yeah. He's saying the Hebrews were always sinners. They were people that were going to be sinners, and that's what his figurative language is there. They were always people that were sinners.
Yeah.
And it's like saying something like, well, you always do this. You ever have a fight with your wife and you say, you always, or you never.
Right.
Well, not always.
Right.
It's an exaggeration.
Exactly.
And that's what David is really doing right here in this passage.
All right, let's consider some verses that explicitly teach against this doctrine. Okay. Look at Ezekiel 18:20. Ezekiel 18:20. Now again, the position of the Catholic Church at least is that the people who came after Adam bear the guilt of Adam's sin, which that doesn't even mean anything to me. They say that means I'm now condemned, but guilt is not condemnation. Paul was still guilty after he was saved, but that's what they said. You bear the guilt of Adam's sin. Okay. Here's what Ezekiel says, verse 18:20. It
says the person who sins will die. The Son will not bear the punishment for the Father's iniquity, nor will the Father bear the punishment for the Son's iniquity. The righteousness of the righteous will be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked will be upon himself.
All right, so the context is Israel is complaining because Ezekiel has been saying, you're wicked, you're going to be punished. And they're trying to say, oh no, it's not our fault. Our parents, it was our parents' fault. They were wicked, and they passed it on to us. That sounds like original sin.
Yeah.
And Ezekiel's going to say, nope. The soul that sins, that soul will die. You made the choice to sin. The son is not going to be guilty for his father's sins, or even his grandfather's or his great-grandfather's. We can go all the way back to Adam. Right. You're not guilty for Adam's sin. You chose to sin. You're guilty of your sin. If you do righteous, you'll be righteous. If you do unrighteous, you'll be unrighteous. That's what Ezekiel says. Well, so there's no guilt you inherit.
And think about what kind of God would we serve if we serve a God that just says, you know what, you're going to be guilty of your great grandfather's sin.
Yeah, well, the moment you're born.
The moment you're born. Well, that's not very fair. And the world right now is talking about, well, God is a loving God. God is a gracious God. Well, if he is, and I believe he is, if he is a loving God and a gracious God, then why would he make me feel guilty or have to bear the burden of sins of my fourth great-grandfather 150 years ago?
Right.
Well, that's ridiculous. That's not a loving and gracious and fair and just God.
Yeah, it's definitely not fair and just.
Yeah.
Justice is, you did this, you get that. Justice is not, he did this, you get that. Yeah. Which is why salvation is not just, Jesus got what I deserved, which is death for my sins, not death for Adam's sins. Jesus died for Adam, and Jesus died for me. Adam didn't condemn me, I condemned me. Jesus saved me.
All right, so I know this is not necessarily something that we had put in our notes or anything like that, but that's okay because, we just need to, go off the cuff here for just a moment. When you said all this, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, the simple verse, for the wages of sin is death, right? Which is found in Romans chapter 6 and verse 23, right? Mm-hmm. So, the wages of sin. Now, if I were to earn a wage, if I go and I do work, who's going to get paid for the work that's been done?
The one who did the work.
The one who did the work. For the wages of sin is death. So if I work sin, then the wage that I get is death, and it's my death. Nobody else has to deal with that at all. I'm the one that's guilty of it. And so if I do work and you get paid, well, that's not fair, that's not just, that's not good.
Right.
Here I've done the work of sin, and therefore I should get the punishment of death. Now the rest of the verse says this, for the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life in Jesus Christ.
Right.
That's the payment, that's the atonement, and that's the beauty of salvation.
Right. Yeah, what original sin says is Adam did the work and I get the wages.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
That's not fair.
Look at Luke 18:16.
Okay.
Now, the doctrine says a child is born automatically a sinner. Therefore, children are sinners. Okay? They didn't commit any sin, they just are, by inheritance, a sinner. And yet, here's what Jesus says about children. Luke 18:16.
Well, I'm going to read verse 15.
Okay.
Okay, and then we'll get into it. It says, and they were bringing even their babies to him so that he might touch them. But when the disciples saw it, they began rebuking them. But Jesus called for them, saying, permit the children to come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it at all.
Yeah. What qualities does a child have that made Jesus look over and see these children and think, I've got myself a lesson to teach here. The kingdom of God is like these little children. So what does he see when he sees a child that makes him think of the kingdom of God?
Well, he sees people that are innocent. He sees people that are pure.
Yeah.
He sees people that are trusting. He sees babies and children that are sinless.
Yes, exactly. Which means you have to be converted to become like a little child, he says, in John chapter 3, to become a part of the kingdom. Yeah. So when I'm converted, I become like a child. When I'm converted, I become sinless. Therefore, a child is sinless.
Yeah.
That's what my master says.
Yeah. Jesus wants everybody in the kingdom to be like babies. He wants them to be innocent. He wants them to be pure. He wants them to be
reliant and trusting.
Trusting and sinless. That's what he's looking for in his kingdom.
Right. That goes against the idea of a child being born corrupted.
Exactly.
Look at Jeremiah 1 verse 5. People who say David was a sinner in the womb, and they use David's words and they twist David's words, have to answer what Jeremiah says here.
Jeremiah begins in chapter 1, verse 5. It says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations."
That is God speaking to Jeremiah, saying, before you were ever born, I had already said, you're going to be my prophet. I had already started a relationship with you. Now, original sin says everybody bears the guilt of Adam's sin with two exceptions. Jesus, and for some reason, Jesus' mother. And they say, well, Jesus' mother, she had to be free of it so she could give birth to Jesus, which I never understood. Then how come Mary's mother didn't have to be free of it, and Mary's mother's mother, and Mary's mother's mother? But they start with Mary. And they say, because Mary had to bear Jesus, Mary, she's the exception, and Jesus is the exception. They didn't bear the guilt of Adam's sin. Okay, that means Jeremiah bears the guilt of Adam's sin. And yet God says to Jeremiah, you and me, we've been tight since before you were born.
Yeah.
And here's David over here in the womb. He's got no God. Jeremiah had God. That doesn't sound very fair.
Yeah.
That sounds like another exception. One more, and that's Romans 5:13.
Okay.
Romans 5:13.
It says, "For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law."
Sin does not condemn a man where there is no law. What law does a baby break to be born a sinner? The law of existing? What law is the baby breaking? Is God judging the baby for the crimes of someone else? If so, he's not a fair God. If he's not a fair God, he's not a God worth serving. Simple as that.
Yeah.
One more verse to defeat this, and this is the one. If you want to say a baby's born condemned, answer me this. 2 Samuel 12:23.
2 Samuel 10:23.
12:23.
12:23. Yes. Okay. Well, let me read 22 as well. Okay, I highlighted it in my Bible that way, so let's read it. It says, "And he said, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me, that the child may live. But now he has died. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me."
Is David in hell right now? Probably 99 out of 100 people are going to say no. Of course not. David's not in hell. David's great and righteous.
A man after God's own heart.
Made mistakes, but repented of them. Righteous before God. Perfect. Yeah. Yes, David is saved. Wherever David is now, so is David's son.
Yeah.
Who was a newborn. Brand spanking new. Got sick and died. This baby was born condemned according to original sin. This baby died still with the original sin tainting his soul. And that's the thing that really annoys me about this, is the Catholic Church has the audacity to say, you have original sin until we baptize you. Well, the Catholic Church wasn't around to baptize David's baby.
No.
So how does anybody, before the Catholic Church started in 606 AD, start getting saved when you're a baby? If everybody is born, then what happened to David's kid? Are they just doomed? Therefore, what's David talking about? Because David knew that his child died and was going to be with God. And he says, I can't bring him back, but I can go to him.
Yeah.
And that's David saying, I made a lot of mistakes, but I'm going to make things right with God so I can see my son again.
Yeah. It's a testament to the idea of a resurrection.
Yeah.
You know, David realizes, hey, there's still hope.
But everybody's going to rise, even the condemned.
Even the condemned.
But if the original sin says David's son is condemned, therefore they have to say David is condemned. Because
Right.
they're going to the same place.
Right.
According to him.
Yeah.
So, no, the people who are sinners, who need to be washed, I agree with the Catholic Church, they need to be baptized. They need to be immersed in water for the forgiveness of their sins, Acts 2:38. But those who need that are sinners who have transgressed, who have missed the mark, who've gone against God, who've rebelled against the law of God, who have overstepped the bounds of God's righteousness and have made themselves unrighteous by their actions. They need it. A baby doesn't need it. A person who has no mental capacity, like a person who's mentally challenged, doesn't need that.
Right.
They're not lost and therefore they don't need to be saved. Yeah. They're just fine with God. They are pure in the sight of God.
And it all goes back to the choice. It's people that can make a choice between righteousness and wickedness. Mm-hmm. And those people are going to be the ones that are held accountable for their actions.
Exactly. Original sin, like we said at the beginning, is not a video or a doctrine that is often taught, just laid out, here's everything we believe about this. But if you actually butterfly it open and see everything that is taught, you realize how unbiblical, how ungodly, and how wrong than it is from the beginning to the end of it. So here at North Heights, we don't teach original sin. We don't believe it, but we don't believe it because the Bible doesn't teach it.
Right. What we're going to teach is that there is a time where people are going to know what is right and what is wrong, and that's when they have to make the choice of what they want to do and how they want to follow God.
And when they make the wrong choice, as all men do, we're going to be there to help them find Jesus Christ, find the blood of Christ, and undo the bad choices they made through his blood. You can find more information on this website about this and many other Bible topics. You're welcome to send us an email. You can find the Contact Us page at the top of the screen, and you can send us a question, and we'll be happy to answer anything that you have. But for right now, we'll see you later. Take care.